The dust of the frontier clung to the wooden porch like a stubborn shadow, the sound of boots pacing across dry planks echoing in the small town that had grown, weary of hardship. She was there, bent low, her hands trembling as she tried to carry a bucket too heavy for her thin arms, her dress torn at the hem and stained with earth. The townsfolk passed by without looking, for they had seen it before, the cruel man who barked orders at her, striking her when she faltered, beating her for being too slow. Every time his hand raised, she flinched as though her soul was shrinking deeper into herself, and the world seemed to approve by its silence. That was until the cowboy came. He was a figure cut from the wild horizon, a hatch shading eyes that had seen too much pain to ever ignore it again, boots dusted from long rides across an unforgiving desert. He leaned against the post at first, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching her stumble, watching the cruel master lash his anger at her fragile frame. The sound of the strike was enough to make the air freeze. The cowboy's hand fell to his side, brushing against the leather holster, but it wasn't the gun he drew, it was his voice, low and steady, the kind of voice that silenced a room before the words even carried meaning. "She ain't slow," he said, stepping forward, his shadow falling over her like a shield. The master turned, spitting venom, mocking the stranger who dared interfere, but the cowboy didn't blink. He bent down, helped her steady the bucket, and looked into her eyes, whispering words only she could hear, words that gave her spine the strength to straighten. The crowd started to gather now, their whispers rising like smoke in a dry wind. The cowboy placed himself between her and the man who struck her, his voice carrying clear for all to hear. "She sets the pace of my heart," the words cracked through the silence like thunder rolling down the mountains. For a moment, no one moved, but something shifted in the air, something unshakable. She had spent her life believing her slowness was weakness, believing she was worth no more than the chores and the pain. But here was a man who saw her rhythm as something sacred, who saw her struggle not as failure but as proof of endurance. She lifted her chin, eyes glistening in the sunlight, and for the first time she did not look at the ground. The master scoffed, called the cowboy a fool, and threatened violence, but the stranger's stance was unyielding, every muscle coiled with the quiet promise of protection. "You'll have to go through me to touch her again," he said, and there was no mistaking the steel in his tone. The townsfolk gasped, some drawing closer, some stepping back, but all knowing they were about to witness something that would change the tide of silence that had plagued them. The woman trembled, torn between fear and hope. As the sun blazed higher, it painted the cowboy in light, a figure unshaken, standing as though he were carved from the very mountains beyond, refusing to let cruelty pass unnoticed. The standoff between the cowboy and the cruel master stretched like a drawn bow, tension straining in every breath as the onlookers waited for the string to snap. The master sneered, his hand twitching toward his belt, but the cowboy's eyes never left his, cold as river stone, calm as a man who had faced death too many times to fear it. "She's mine," the master spat, his voice thick with possessive venom, and for the first time the woman's heart cracked open at the truth she had ignored. She was never his. She had only been caged. The cowboy's lips curled, not in anger but in defiance, and he took another step closer, his presence filling the space like a storm rolling in. "No man owns a woman's spirit," he said, his words cutting deeper than any blade. The crowd stirred, whispers shifting into murmurs of agreement, as though his courage had given them permission to remember their own buried humanity. The woman's knees wavered, but instead of falling, she leaned slightly forward, toward the cowboy, as if his strength was flowing into her. The master swung, a brutal hand meant to silence the defiance, but the cowboy was faster, catching the wrist mid-air, twisting it until the man howled. Gasps erupted from the crowd, and the woman covered her mouth, tears springing not from fear this time, but from a wild, unfamiliar feeling relief. The cowboy shoved the man back, not with the malice of revenge, but with the strength of someone who simply would not tolerate injustice another second. He turned to her, his voice softening though the fire in his eyes still burned. "You don't have to move fast, darlin'," he said, lifting her chin so her eyes met his. "You only have to move in your own time. And I'll walk right beside you." Something inside her broke and healed at once, like chains shattering to reveal wings. She stepped toward him, trembling but unafraid now, and though the master cursed and raged behind them, no one came to his aid. The crowd, once silent in their complicity, now stood taller, some even stepping between the brute and the pair, as if awakened by the cowboy's bravery. The woman placed her hand in the cowboy's, the calloused strength of his palm grounding her, and for the first time she felt the world open instead of close in. "Where will we go?" she asked, her voice fragile but alive. He tipped his hat, a smile tugging at his lips. "Anywhere your heart leads, because it's your pace I follow." The words sealed, something unspoken between them, a vow that echoed louder than the cruel man's shouts, louder than the clamor of onlookers. It was a vow that told her she was not too slow, not too broken, not too weak. She was the measure of her own worth.